I am Michelle Marinowski. I'm an exhibit developer at the Tech Interactive, working on creating relevant exhibitions for our community. I'd like to thank the audience, all of you, for tuning in to the Tech Interactive's discussion on breakthrough tech with Opus 12. We have a great conversation planned for you this afternoon. But before we get started, a few housekeeping notes. I want to let the audience know that this talk is being recorded. We would love to engage with you, our audience. As your questions come up, please add them to the Q&A and we will share them in our conversation. I'd like to thank the supporters of the Tech Interactive. Our mission at the Tech Interactive is to inspire the innovator in everyone. We envision our future as developing problem solvers locally, nationally, and globally that will make the world better. We have an amazing guest today for our conversation on breakthrough tech, Dr. Natasha Cave. Natasha Cave is the co-founder and chief scientific officer of Opus 12, where she developed technology that transforms carbon dioxide into high-value products like fuels and plastics. In 2019, Opus 12 was awarded the Keeling Curve Prize, a global warming solutions project. Natasha received her bachelor's degree in engineering from Franklin W. Olin College of Engineering in 2006, and her PhD in mechanical engineering from Stanford University. In between her time at Olin and Stanford, Natasha worked as a utilities technician for Raytheon Polar Services and spent 6 months in the Antarctic. In an interview with Olin School of Engineering, Natasha shared that her superpower is dealing with unstable situations. Welcome, Natasha. I'm really looking forward to our discussion.
Thanks, Michelle. I'm excited to be here.
I am too. I'm glad you're here. I want to learn much more about Opus 12 and the work that you do there. I know you have a slide deck, so I'd love to get started.
Yes. Okay, great. So thanks so much for that bio. I'm just going to go and give a high-level overview of Opus 12, go in a little bit more detail of where our company sits within this emerging trend and what we're looking to do. So first I want to tell you a little bit about the origin story of Opus 12. So I'm one of 3 co-founders, myself and Kendra. We both did our PhD in the same lab at Stanford University, and that's where we met. And then we later met Nicholas, who was in the business school, getting a master's in business administration and engineering. And the 3 of us came together to form Opus 12 toward the end of my PhD. And my inherent passion for doing stuff with climate and dealing with waste specifically comes from my own childhood, where I grew up in Houston, Texas. And I grew up in a neighborhood that was adjacent to an abandoned oil and gas waste site. And seeing how that waste had over time leached into the water supply and was linked to a higher rate of rare forms of cancers and diseases, hearing about that as a teenager, even though I wasn't directly affected by it, because my family was upstream of where that was happening, but just hearing of all these stories in the neighborhood of people going through this and this realization really made it personal for me to want to do something in this space. So I, from then on, decided that I was going to do something for climate and do something in waste. And so I built my career by learning science and technology in school, and then starting a company that deals with waste. So Opus 12 kind of sees ourselves within this emerging trend of many companies that are coming about that are taking CO2 and making products out of it. So this picture was taken from the X Prize that's going on right now, where there are several companies competing to take CO2 and make items out of it. In fact, there's companies that are making everything from, you see, watches and slippers and even vodka, which you can drink once you're of age, of course. And so Opus 12 is part of that trend. And what we do, we call our technology industrial photosynthesis, because we're effectively mimicking what plants do. So plants take carbon dioxide, they use the energy from the sun, and they convert that carbon dioxide into sugars that the plant uses for its own growth and development. So at Opus 12, we're doing a very similar thing. We're taking CO2 and we're using energy in the form of electricity, and we're converting that CO2 into useful molecules for industrial growth and development. And to kind of talk a little bit more detail on like how this works, the way I describe it is that we have this metal catalyst, which you see here at the bottom, and then we use electricity. Electricity in the presence of the metal catalyst will effectively electrocute both a CO2 and a water molecule that's present on the metal catalyst. And when that happens, the CO2 and water molecule will break down to smaller atomic bits. And then those atomic bits will reform into new molecules. And in fact, when myself and Kendra were doing our PhD at Stanford, we identified 16 new molecules that we could make with this process. Now, as a company within Opus 12, we're only focused on 3 of these molecules, but in theory, you could make 16, and ideally, you could make any molecule that has a carbon, a hydrogen, or an oxygen in it. And in fact, we can make the same molecules that are currently made from petroleum today. And to take a step back on what that looks like, it's just CO2, water, and electricity going into our system, which we have a rendering of that here. And then within that system, you have that metal catalyst, and that metal catalyst is breaking down the CO2 and water molecules into smaller atomic bits. And then those atomic bits are coming out, and we can form fuels and other compounds with them. And we also produce oxygen as a byproduct in our system. So typically that oxygen can either be vented into the atmosphere, and it is a benign molecule in the atmosphere, or you can also sell oxygen. There's a market for it. If you've been to a hospital, you've seen people on an oxygen machine where the oxygen is being pumped into their lungs. And so that oxygen can come from air, or it could come from our machine. Now let's drill down a little bit further to show you kind of what this actually looks like. If you were to open up one of our systems, you would see what we call a membrane electrode assembly. And that's shown here in this slide. And so in that membrane electrode assembly is where we house the metal catalyst. And those metal catalysts are really metal nanoparticles. And so if you had a microscope, you could see those nanoparticles with a microscope, but you can't with a naked eye. But they're sprayed onto this membrane electrode assembly, and that membrane is put into existing reactors. And we basically repurpose those existing reactors to convert CO2 into useful molecules. And the analogy we typically use is that in your laptop, you have a chip that's made by Intel. And that chip that Intel makes is the sort of brains and heart and soul of the laptop. And so we are effectively the chip that goes into these reactors that are built already, and we can repurpose them to make them CO2 conversion machines. And one thing that we really are proud of is that our system, once we're at this larger scale, once we drop in our membranes, we will be putting the CO2 conversion power of about 37,000 trees in something that's the size of a suitcase. So that's where my background picture comes from, is that, imagine 37,000 trees equivalent located near a solar field or wind turbine, and converting CO2 either from an emission source or directly from the air into useful products and compounds. And there's one more really unique and cool feature about our technology is that it can be useful for space travel. So over 95% of the atmosphere on Mars is carbon dioxide. So we can take carbon dioxide from Mars with our system and make plastics or make methane, which is the rocket fuel of choice, and also other just useful compounds that would be necessary for sustaining life on Mars or on the moon or wherever in space one might find themselves. So that's a high-level overview of Opus 12, and I look forward to answering questions.
Great. Thank you so much. That's fascinating, and I can't wait to dig in. It's really exciting what you're doing. And so it's amazing to me, the idea of 37,000 trees in a suitcase, and that you can take something that's unwanted, like carbon dioxide emissions, and make a very necessary commodity like plastics out of it. So I wanted to kind of start at the beginning for the students and innovators in our audience and people who are, have ideas and visions in their mind and are on this path that you are on, and kind of getting at and kind of overcoming obstacles. So during your work, as you founded Opus 12, did anyone ever tell you that your ideas wouldn't work or that they were unpractical? And how did you respond to that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think going in school, wanting to do science, math, and engineering, a lot of times the courses there can be fairly challenging. And I think I had some people who were very, super supportive and others who weren't, and who kind of thought, oh, maybe I should study something else. And I think for me, I've always tried to identify who are the allies and who are the people who really know what you're doing and can be supportive, and being able to have one of them to call on and to run to, because there will always be low moments. There'll be people who say that you can't do that. People now who even say that this isn't practical and not possible. But there's enough people that are saying that we can do it and are supporting us, and so we're moving forward.
Wonderful, thank you. So what practical tips do you have that you can share with our audience, people listening in on who want to pursue their own impractical accomplishments? How would you tell them to kind of overcome their own obstacles?
Yeah, I would say, having this balance of both patience and impatience. You want to have the impatience to like kind of keep you motivated and like moving things forward, and really digging deep and trying to understand like what's actually happening here and how can you make it better. What are the edges of knowledge and how can you push that boundary? But then also realizing that can take some time, and so making sure that there's that time is being allocated for that, and that you can make space for it, and really just like dive deep and know that it's not going to be an easy solution, because if it was easy, it's like someone would have done it already. And so things that aren't practical just can take a lot of time, but that's still, I find at least that sense of adrenaline in the small accomplishments, the little bit of extra knowledge that you gain every day, can be really impactful in keeping things going and keeping spirits high.
Yeah. How do you get naysayers on your side?
Yeah, I think for us, it's just been like building the prototype or building the product, and then showing that it works. One of the things that we've done early on is that we have sent our system for third-party validation. And in fact, in California now, they have a more systematic way for clean tech companies to leverage the national labs and the universities to do third-party validation and testing. And that can be really helpful early on to get that third party who, as a national lab, they're, should have no conflict of interest and can say that, yes, this works, we've tested it, we understand the physics and the science behind it, and we can validate that it's a very useful solution. So when you have that third party saying, what this person's doing is legit, that's hard to say no to. And then I think also too, just showing that we could build a team and bring people in and have people give up their time to work on this technology is also a super powerful statement that what you're doing is important enough, and that people who are working on it inside and know the details are willing to spend more time and willing to do things to make it better. So we've, in the naysayers that we've convinced and converted, that's usually the path that we've taken.
Yeah. And I want to dig in a little bit at something that was in your slide deck and something that you just mentioned just now, and that is the team that you work with. And you mentioned Kendra and how you two met each other and worked with each other in graduate school. I wanted to talk about how your team helps you and how you help your team. That whole idea of teamwork and getting some of these impractical and visionary things done.
Oh yeah, the team is super, super important. What we're doing is such a huge challenge, and there's just so many milestones along the way that it's too much for one person. And even the early days of the company starting out, before we had hired a larger team, our team is about 36 people now. But before that, just getting things off the ground, getting our first prototype, and then applying for grants and receiving grant funding. It was just so much nicer to be able to spread the work out, and we could effectively specialize. So, Nicholas was really good at writing commercialization plans and understanding how our business would grow on the market side. Myself and Kendra, we looked at the technology and could figure out ways how to explain how impactful the technology would be, but also what the work plan would be to improve the technology to get it to the state where it could be commercial. And then there was also the operational stuff of registering our company with the federal government and getting a tax ID and getting a bank account and all these things. And so having the team there to make sure that we push things forward and could deal with everything was really huge. And also, there's always especially when starting a company and starting a new endeavor, there can be really high highs, but there also can be really low lows. Definitely much more extreme. And so for both the super highs and the super lows, it's so nice to have other people there, because hopefully at least one person's more optimistic than the other two and can kind of bring them along back to optimism. And then also too, when things are really great, you also have people to celebrate with, and you can go out and take that moment to celebrate with them. And that's always nice to have people to celebrate the victories with.
Yeah, that I can imagine makes you feel really good and makes you want to go on further too. We have a Q&A question. I thought we would try something different and kind of ask the Q&A questions along the way. Question from Rebecca in the audience: was there a moment when you first realized that the idea that you have really would work? Can you describe what that felt like?
Yeah, definitely. So well, to give you a little bit more of the backstory with us. So, when I was at the end of my PhD and we were, the three of us were trying to figure out, okay, how do we start the company and build the first prototype? We realized it would take a non-trivial amount of funding because, in order to build these things, you need a lab, you need infrastructure. We needed spray equipment. We needed all these things to kind of make these membrane electrode assemblies. And we were just three mostly broke grad students and didn't have any funding for that. So, we thought, we could get, venture capital funding. So we kind of talked with a bunch of people and realized that no one was going to give us money until we had a prototype. And we couldn't afford a prototype. And we were really shocked by that too, because back in that time, there was this app that had recently won $1 million, and all the app did was you push a button and it would send a yo to your friend. And so we were like, if they raise $1 million, we should be able to raise, someone should take a chance on us that we can build this first prototype. And so what eventually happened is we got in the program, which was called Cyclotron Road at the time. Now it's called Activate. But we were able to be housed at Lawrence Berkeley National Lab. And there we could use the lab equipment and lab space. We also were given a fellowship, so we had a stipend, we had a supplies budget. We basically had funding to build our first prototype. And with that, you know, we now had the space, and so now we had to like finally, you know, take the time to test our ideas. And the first few shots that we tested did not have the performance we would need to really to scale up the system. And I remember we had this really big grant that we were writing, and so we had to kind of pause the lab work for a little bit. So we paused the lab work, and we worked on this grant, like all hands on deck kind of thing, for 2 or 3 weeks. And then we submitted the grant on like a Monday. Then we took like Tuesday and just kind of did like duty. And then Wednesday we started experiments again. And there was like a handful of experiments that we did. And one of those experiments finally gave us results that were within the range of what we needed. It wasn't dead on, but it was within you know, 2 or 3x of what we needed. And so that was the first moment when we were like, okay, this can this can work. And by then, you know, we were already months into it. We've already written several grants. We'd already gotten into this program at Lawrenceburg National Lab. So, you know, there were moments where we were like, oh, I don't know if this is actually going to be a thing.
Yeah, grant writing is always tough. So I wanted to dig in also into the technology a little bit, but before we kind of dive into that, I'd love to hear from our audience about how familiar they are with carbon capture technology. So we'll be publishing a poll. I think that's going to be coming up any minute now. And please share your thoughts in this poll window about how familiar you are with carbon capture technology. Because I think that once we get this going, you know, once we can, this poll can kind of guide how we talk about it. It looks like a couple of folks, more people are, have not heard about carbon capture technology. So this is a great opportunity for them to learn more. A couple of people are familiar and fascinated. So that's great. Let's see. I think we have another couple of minutes. Please share how familiar you are. So maybe we can talk a little bit more about, since people haven't heard about it, carbon capture, and possibly, let me share this out. What are different ways that people in the audience can engage with the carbon capture space? I guess the first thing is to learn more about it, right? And there's different ways to capture carbon, different ways to sequester it. But beyond that, how can people like me engage in that space?
Yeah, absolutely. So, so first I'll talk about carbon capture and utilization, because what we do is actually utilization of the CO2. Mm-hmm. The capture part would precede our technology. And so what happens with capture is that oftentimes CO2 is in a stream of other gas molecules. So for example, in the air around us, you know, 80% of the air is nitrogen, and about 19% is oxygen, 19 to 20%. And then there's a small amount of these other gases, like CO2 is on average 400 parts per million. So when you have, you know, the CO2 molecule and it's surrounded by all these other gas molecules, you want to separate those out. You want to just concentrate the CO2 molecule and let all the other gas molecules flow through. And so the way you could do that is you have the gas stream pass through and have something that the CO2 will stick to, and only the CO2. So the nitrogen and the oxygen won't stick to it, but just the CO2 will stick to it. And then once it gets it's stuck there, you can stop the gas from coming through. And then now you have the CO2 stuck to a bunch of different little sites. And then you can either through temperature changes or pressure changes, you can release the CO2 into a space. and then send that concentrated CO2 into like our system, for example. So that's the CO2 capture part. And there are companies that work on that, either capturing directly from the air or capturing it from a point source emission where you might have CO2 that's, 10% of the CO2 emission source, coming out of, some type of industrial process. And so once you've captured it, you then can put it into our system. And so our system, does the CO2 conversion. Now, there are other ways in which you can convert CO2 into something useful. So, again, like plants do it, right? They take the CO2 and they make sugars. You can also, there's some types of bacteria and yeast. Actually, I think it's mainly just bacteria that can use hydrogen coupled with CO2 and can convert that CO2 into different molecules. There's also a way you can do it thermochemically. So you could take CO2 as well as hydrogen and combine it at high temperatures, and you can make new molecules out of that. And it's effectively the same thing that we're doing. Is instead of using electricity to break apart the molecules and rearrange the atoms into new molecules, you're using high temperatures to strip apart the atoms and rearrange them into new molecules. So I would say that's the kind of high level overview of carbon capture and then utilization as well. And I would say anyone who wants to get into that field, especially, being a teenager, I would say, to study math and science as much as you can, especially, physical sciences or even biological sciences, because, again, there are these microbes that can convert CO2, and even plants, again, can convert CO2 into useful products. So, studying how that process happens, you can make it better and more efficient and more useful in industry. And so I can't stress enough, understanding the world around us is super important. And that mainly comes through, like not only, studying it in the classroom, but also, events like this where you can learn about science, and then also too, just doing experiments and asking questions and reading books. There's so many ways to engage with science in the world around us.
Okay, so that's what ways that the teens can engage in carbon capture. Learning, attending talks like these, learning about it at school, focusing on your math and science. So, we have a lot of kids, as I've said before, a lot of teens here, parents of teens. What advice do you have for these folks that want to pursue that career path, like similar to yours, that is? Maybe you can tell us a little bit more about things that you studied in school as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I would say, studying physics and math and science in general can be quite challenging. I mean, the reason so is that it often builds upon each other. So you need to kind of understand some basic principles and like master them. And then you add on new layers on top of that. And so, it's one of those things where you kind of have to understand each particular layer and each building block as you move along. And so, it can take some time before you feel like you've actually mastered some part of the whatever topic you're studying. And so I would say having, perseverance and realizing that it'll be challenging. It'll be challenging for everyone. And that moments when it feels like you maybe, one particular subtopic is not quite resonating, don't be afraid to talk about it with others or seek out other resources. I so wish that we had Khan Academy and other resources when I was going to school, because it's just been amazing. Now that I use Khan Academy to like review topics, but it's just wonderful to like all these resources that are available on the internet to be able to really like refresh your thinking and kind of and see problems in different ways and make sure that they're understood. I think that can be really really valuable.
Great. I can't believe that it's time to do this already, but it's time for audience Q&A. I was getting really wrapped up in the things that you were talking about, and especially about your talk about carbon capture. Got a couple of questions that I think would be really interesting to discuss with you. So how, you know, and this is a very relevant topic right now, how have you dealt with discrimination in the STEM field, you know, as a woman? Uh, those are things that I've had to deal with as well in the STEM arena. But how have you dealt with discrimination as a woman, and particularly as a woman of color in your field? Can you say a few words about that? That's one of the Q&A questions.
Yeah, for sure. And you know, I in looking back, I'm not sure. You know, and sometimes hindsight is 20/20, but I'm like wondering if there was better ways for me to handle it. But I think for me, I've at least wherever I was able to find people that I could kind of talk to and get some level of reassurance and kind of be told to kind of keep going. I think a lot of times, like, I did feel somewhat isolated and felt like, oh, you know, there were lots of stories and thoughts like kind of going through my head at times, like when I was the only Black person in the class, or, you know, maybe I was, you know, afraid to ask questions and things like that. And I think talking with other people and realizing that, you know, I wasn't always the only one. There were other people feeling this sort of isolation and feeling like, you know, that they weren't, you know, they were different as well, and for other reasons. I think it gave me a sense of camaraderie of like, okay, I'm not in this alone. It could give me some more perseverance to push forward. But yeah, it's definitely, I think it's definitely exist. And I don't know I don't have any great way of combating it, but beyond just like being successful myself and just making it through and kind of pushing forward and continue to do the things that I want to do, and you know, continue to learn and grow and be successful, and just kind of like also, you know, seeking allies where I can, and kind of taking opportunities when they come. Yeah, that's
Yeah, great. That's a great answer. Thank you. Allyship is super important. I want to encourage our audience to add more questions to the Q&A. We've got a really great one here from a father with a 10-year-old daughter who is interested in engineering projects. Can you share what was inspiring or what experiences led you to end up in engineering while growing up? I think some of the living in Houston, I think, was a big part of it, right? But you know, if you could expand on that, that would be great.
Yeah, for sure. Living in Houston was part of it for various reasons. One was, you know, as I mentioned earlier, this sort of environmental incident that happened in a neighborhood adjacent to me, seeing just how science and technology, and specifically the waste from a technological center could be harmful. And I really wanted to work with technology in ways that could be beneficial. But also, I mean, NASA's in Houston, has a strong presence there. And so that was also really inspiring. I mean, we could go to the NASA Center and they had an exhibit, you know, pretty much like a museum where you could go and see all the different ways in which the space program has developed science and technology and developed travel into space. And I've always been fascinated by that. And that was really motivate.
Yeah.
And then Houston also has these magnet schools in the public school system where you could go and specialize in certain things. So I actually specialize in engineering in high school. And that means I got exposure to it pretty early. And I was able to really solidify that this was something I wanted to do. Now, even though, you know, the school systems, as far as I know, don't have that type of program here, but one thing I found out kind of later in my high school career that I wish I had done earlier was that the community colleges will oftentimes, at least in Houston and Texas, they would give high school students you could almost go for free, I think. Like they had some kind of like program where it was either free or super cheap. And the teachers and professors at community college, at least the ones I've interacted with, have been amazing. I mean, they really love teaching. They really love what they're doing. They really want to engage with students. And so, if you are in high school, or maybe even in middle school, I would look to the community colleges and see if you can take some engineering classes there, and or advanced math and science, and really kind of get a sense of what it's like to be in those types of classes, and get a sense to more of the field. I think it's just a wonderful opportunity.
Yeah. High school was a fun time for me because I was in circuits lab and in shop class, and those classes actually made me so much more confident about doing things that were hands-on, and they were very tangible as well. Those were really a lot of fun for me. So I'd love to talk a little bit more, and I'm not sure how this will work out for our audience, but I'll go ahead and push the envelope. One of the things that you talk about on your website is circularity, and this is something that I think you and I have chatted about very briefly, about what circularity is, and how Opus 12 fits into the circularity and fits into the circular economy. I attended a whole conference on circularity these past 3 days. It's been fascinating to learn more about that topic.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, one way we also describe our technology is that we are recycling CO2. So we're basically, you can imagine in the case of a fuel, you have this liquid fuel that you use and you make CO2. If you were to capture that CO2 and convert it back into fuels using solar electricity, wind, or some type of renewable no carbon electricity, you basically are closing and creating an industrial carbon cycle. And so that CO2 doesn't have to stay in the air. It could come back and become a fuel. Same for industrial processes. And so, we see our process as basically creating part of that industrial carbon cycle, where products that we love today and when we use, anywhere from our shoes into the household components, they have, these plastics and these polymers in it. And so we can make those from CO2, and then, you can recycle that CO2 through either recycling the plastic itself, or you could, effectively degrade, biodegrade the plastic, and then take the CO2 again and make more polymers out of it. So you can create this sort of circularity of taking waste from one cycle or one process and making it the feedstock or input of another.
Okay, and that's essentially how Opus 12 fits into this this whole circular economy concept or idea. We have time for, I think, one more question. Do you have any tips for people that have big ideas and want to know how to move forward? I know we touched on this a little bit, in the conversation, but I just thought we could just reiterate that a little bit, moving forward. The thing that I find super impressive about Opus 12 is that you went through those obstacles. The big idea of prototype, test, create a product, iterate. Can you speak more to the folks in the audience about that process, about moving forward a product?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think for us, when we first started off, this was a big, intractable project. And the key for us was to really break it down into smaller key milestones and kind of accomplishments that we could do. So the first few steps we did was one, kind of talk to people in the industry and kind of understand, like assuming we could build this system, like what would it take for someone to be interested in the molecules that we could make, or to purchase a system that we can make? Like what would that need to look like? And so once we had an understanding of kind of what potential customers would want, that could guide our technology development, because then we had a clear roadmap of like, okay, our energy efficiency needs to be this amount, our current density needs to be a certain amount, and it was all guided by what actually would be useful or needed or wanted it within the market. And so we built our first prototype with those performance metrics in mind from customers. And so that prototype was pretty small. It's about the size of a postage stamp in terms of the size of the electrode. And so the reason we started small was because it was cheaper. We didn't, even though we had some funding, we didn't have a ton of funding. So it was cheaper to do iterations. We could make that small one and show that we could reach the performance goals. And then once we did that on the smaller scale, this postage stamp scale, we went a little bit bigger, went about 5x bigger, to something that's the size of maybe like a Post-it note. And then did the same thing. We iterated there, saw that we could replicate the performance. And then once we did that, we then did another 4x scale up to something that was the size of like a postcard. And then with this postcard size system, we were in the range of where customers who would be interested in small amounts of the molecules that we could make, we could start to engage with them and show them like, look, we've scaled up already. We have our larger electrode. We could put that electrode into a full system. That first system is about the size of a dishwasher. And that dishwasher size system, we could use to actually make products out of it. And so we could show that, hey, here's our system. We could get the third-party validation that we needed, because we had that larger electrode we could send around. And we could actually make products, so we could engage with customers at a more meaningful level. And all the while, we're still scaling up to a much larger size. So we're scaling up to something that's about the size of 2 sheets of paper. Will be our scale up, but next and final scale up. So we're really excited about that. But all along the way, we'll be engaging with customers who could use the molecules at that various scale, and basically, engaging with them in a way that's meaningful, either doing a demonstration or a pilot or some sort of thing. So it's really just about making those smaller milestones along the way, both on the customer engagement side and the product development and technology development side.
Yeah, that's great. I can't believe it, but we've now pretty much finished our time together. I got really involved in what you were saying. So I wanted to thank you so much for answering our audience questions. And before we go, Natasha, just wanted to ask if you have any words of advice for our audience members, just really quickly, really briefly, about things, maybe 1 or 2 things that you can tell the 10-year-old girl that was listening in.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say definitely study and learn and grow and develop as much as you can in the sciences and math. I found that super rewarding, and really can't stress that enough. And also, looking for other avenues to do engineering projects where you can work on a project and see it from beginning to end, and even working with a team can be really rewarding and insightful. So yes, I would just encourage everyone to continue to learn and grow. It's a lifelong endeavor. So yeah.
Great. Thank you so much. So summing up the conversation so far, just picking things out of the conversation, we do have some calls to action to reduce your own carbon emissions, your own carbon footprint that are up right now. So being conscious consumers, learning about where our energy comes from, and being mindful of the energy that we use. So I'd like to thank Dr. Natasha Kaye for joining us to discuss breakthrough tech with Opus 12. Thank you, Natasha. And just wanted to let the audience know to follow the Tech Interactive and keep an eye out for future events. Many thanks to our sponsors, the sponsors for this Tech for Global Good, and a great big thank you to our audience for joining us. I hope to see you soon, and I want to wish you all a great afternoon. Thank you so much.